So Biocene is a word. It's a hope that we can and we will move forward to an epoch of time where we re-merge with nature and the natural systems, and we reclaim the fact that we are nature. And that instead of continuing on this misguided path of destruction, we'll use our talents and our intellect to generate our nature and ourselves. So with that, I would like to welcome Isaac Arthur to the podium, and he is going to talk to us about 10 ways nature could influence transportation.
Good morning, everyone. I am Isaac Arthur. I am the host of Science and Futurism with Isaac Arthur, and today I'm going to be talking to you about all the ways transportation is going to mimic biology in the next 10 years. And I wanted to warn from the outset, I'm going to be taking some liberties with the words transportation, mimic, biology, and the number 10. But other So before we get started, I wanted to take a moment to thank the Ohio Aerospace Institute for hosting this event and for all the sponsors who were kind enough to foot the bill for this conference. Thank you very much, and can we give them a quick round of applause? So the advice I always give my audience at the start of our weekly episodes is to grab a drink and a snack before we get started, because we are going to be here for a while. And indeed, the show has been going for almost 80 years now, and it has been an awesome ride. We have produced over 400 episodes on a wide variety of topics, and you can see some of those episodes up on the screen there with their cover art. We've favored some of the biology episodes on this, but we do a lot of space shows too. Collectively, they have gotten over 100 million views on YouTube, and there are 700,000 subscribers there on that platform, and we have a ton more on a bunch of other platforms like Reddit, Facebook, Spotify, iTunes, Audible, Amazon, and more. So if you're looking for a way to spend a few hundred hours of listening time, you can always go look them up afterwards. So that was a very great, wonderful thing to build, and I credit a lot of that success to just kind of maintaining a realistic and kind of upbeat flavor about the future ahead of us. There's an awful lot to find fault with in humanity, but I've never failed to be impressed by either our imagination or our ambition. So I get to wake up every morning to work on new episodes of my show with absolute confidence that the future will be a bright and wonderful place if we are willing to buckle down and work for it. There is a lot of work ahead of us, but if we do, the horizon, very bright place. And speaking of horizons and inspiration, for technology, there's been few better sources than nature itself, as everyone at this conference already knows. Down the century, humanity has often borrowed from or been inspired by nature, and perhaps in no area more than transportation, particularly flight. Birds have been crucial to not only encouraging us to attempt flight, but to better understand how to do it safely, and in some cases more quietly. Over there you see the owl, which is like the ninja of the bird kingdom, and from that we've been learning how to make quieter airplanes and drones. So flight is not the rare exception to this inspiration of nature in technology, and biomimicry has been crucial to improving our efficiency, speed, and safety in transportation, such as the kingfisher there, which helped to inspire the nose shape for the bullet train, I am told. And today I thought we would look at some emerging transportation technologies that will mimic nature or draw from nature. And of course, the first of those and most hyped of those is, the robot car. Show of hands real quick. Here, who would like to own a robot car, a robot piloted car? It's more hands than I would expect. Most people don't. The idea is not that popular. They do not want a robotic car that's going to pilot things for them. They don't necessarily mind the idea that a robot car might pilot a drunk person home instead of them taking the wheel themselves. But a lot of people, they don't want to lose that control. However, a much easier sell is a computer-assisted car. Same little concept. They like a lot of those computer features, right? You like that screen in the back that lets you back up without hitting things. You like collision avoidance. You like cruise control. You like a little thing that's going to beep up to tell you you're speeding, but not to stop you from speeding. Right? You love that help navigating. It gives you something to get you there and to course that when you don't get there. And of course, you like those traffic condition updates to tell you you're about to go hit a big speed trap or a big slowdown, and there's nothing you can do at this point to avoid it because you're already committed to that segment of road. Something that could take over and keep you in your lane if you got a phone call or a text. That's something people would like. Right? Something that when you're doing those really long drives to and from conferences because you don't want to go through the airport will take over if you get highway hypnosis, or just get tired, or just feel like taking a nap. Those options are co-pilot. People are a lot more okay with. So some of these technologies, it's very important to phrase them the way that people are going to want to find. But the key, of course, is collision avoidance, because that's one of those examples where whether or not you can voluntarily hit the button, say take control, there has to be that safety feature on collision avoidance that can take over, period. Right? Oh, you could turn the whole thing off, but if you got on at all, it has to have some criteria that lets it turn on without your permission. And that's something that people might not really like that much. So what we need to achieve is to determine what computer can take control of without being told to, and how much. This begs lawsuits. You're going to get sued for this technology. So it needs to be based on hard math and data. It also needs to remember that it's not just cause it has to avoid, right? And that if you give a jury a robot and a corporation and a statistician on one side, and a cute little kid with a teary face whose puppy got ran over by your car when it's doing collision avoidance, you will lose that lawsuit. It doesn't matter how good your data is. So we are looking for inspiration for keeping it as simple as possible, as transparent as possible, so that people understand it. It can't be a black box technology. So it helps draw inspiration from things like fish there. I wonder what the fish was doing with the car. We have some examples like the mosquito fish that are amazingly good at moving in really tight confines. And we can draw on other things, boards, chords, etc., as basic odds, but that's going to be the big one, because if you have that transparency of simplicity, and these things all do it simply because they're stupid. They're not smart, they're dumb. They're dumber than most of our existing computers. That collision technology is going to be something people can look at and say, that's how I work, and they get trust in that. That's the baseline trust they can build on. So, we, of course, are not just interested in avoiding collisions with cars, and this is where things change around a little bit. Self-driving cars are all the rage and hype, but we already have autopilots in aircraft, and drones are becoming more of an everyday thing, right? You can own one. I'm surprised how many people do own them. I wish they stopped flying them around my house. So you got some problems there, because they are also really built around the idea of getting sued. Your pizza delivery drone, or your drone grub hub drone comes by, goes to deliver your piping hot pizza to someone in 30 minutes or less. They open the door, and it appears to deliver to them, and sliding hot piping pizza falls on that person's face. Lawsuit. You're going to be sued out of oblivion before your startup has even had a chance to actually get started. So you also have this problem then with the public relations nightmare that you might have with any of these automated things, but there's a difference between these cars and these drones. There are three key ways in which our drones are going to vary from our cars. First, we want them as automated as possible. We're not looking for the car-assisted thing of before. We want automation here. That's the whole savings aspect. Second, we have to deal with all three dimensions. It's not just two-dimensional. In this regard, it might be the birds, but also the bees, which help inspire us. I was talking to someone coming in here back on Tuesday, Glenn, and we were talking about beehives. I keep bees, his wife keeps bees. Show of hands again. Anybody here keep bees, or know who does keep bees? Had any friends? Got a few here. Surprisingly more common hobby than you'd think. But bees are the masters of getting in and out of hives fast, quick, and easy. They have very good collision avoidance. So this is kind of an example of, in the future, all kids might be learning about the birds and the bees in a slightly different sense. We get to teach our drones how to act like the bees. So number three, the third way in which they're going to vary from robocalls is that the third way is it's not the same environment. On a road, all sorts of unexpected things can happen, and collisions are often caused by something weird, like a garbage can rolling into it. But there's a pretty sharp, nice defined boundary curve of weird things that can happen to cause a collision. Not so when you're off the road and into the general human ecosystem and landscape. That's where you got to worry about your drone's flying by, and the dog jumps up behind the fence and takes the drone out. Or you're walking by with the delivery drone's coming, you open your screen door because you hear buzzing, and you just killed that drone. Right? All these other things they have to worry about. So there's a much greater complexity for evasion and proper protocol and procedure that they're going to have to work with there. They might even need voice commands, because people might want to be able to say, oh yeah, come over here. Come deliver to this door, or the garage, go over here. These little changes are things that we'll probably need to account with as we get into drone delivery to be able to enjoy those savings in cost and carbon. So navigating our roads is a lot easier than the rest of the world. I always print my notes out in advance of these things because I never trust technology. People tell me that's ironic when you're a futurist. So we're speaking of roads, and of course, fast and heavy passenger and freight transportation requires pathways, and finding the optimum place to put those is a challenge not just for us, but for nature too. Organisms in nature often need to move large quantities of raw materials, fuels, and wastes around themselves, and require transport networks for this. So back in 2010, there were some researchers who decided to put together a petri dish that looked like Tokyo and its nearby cities and satellite communities. There's little spots of food on there. That is a petri dish. The map is a map. And so they put the food down there and introduced a slime mold, and it quickly grew. As you see all those transportation networks there, in many cases, there were very close matches with the existing rail and freight. This tells us that nature has learned how to solve some of these optimization problems, and that we can probably go ahead and learn to mimic that in some cases. But with a caveat, any AI that we use this is obviously going to have to do extra steps, right? We need to account for things like day-night cycles that will not apply to the mold. We need to find ways to have it apply to seasonal behavior that, again, the mold wouldn't know about. We need to be able to take into account aspects of the topology, like its geology and hydrology, for what roads and pathways are a good place to run, because the swamp that's there that it's not really on your petri dish is going to be an issue. So, but that is the basic concept there for what we might be looking at to replicate it. And again, our roads are inspired by mold. So this suggests that transport networks of simple amoeba may be as good or even better at us in some cases as planning. So roads are the holy grail of self-repairing technology and maintenance. We would love to have roads that fix themselves. We would never, ever again have to drive around all those orange coins, those giant cones that slow us down and make it very hard for us to get here this morning. And of course, we wouldn't have to worry about other problems, which people get hit on the way, while they're working on those things. All the extra congestion, all the extra carbon footprint getting stuck in that traffic. We would like to have self-healing roads. And we got some inspirations from that nature too. One of those, of course, is tree bark. Another is coral reefs. And we've had some amazing accomplishments, like learning how to use sunflower oil microcapsules in asphalt to reduce binder viscosity. But one that particularly caught my attention recently, of course, a big pile of rebar, we found that if you actually put little metal fibers, little steel fibers in the asphalt at a relatively high concentration when you begin making that road, that you can then heat those up by induction. You run something over top and put induction in there, and it starts to heat those up, and that fairly evenly heats up the entire road. So you get some amount of like liquid malleability that lets you flatten it out. Now, this is supposed to be nature-inspired, and that does sound a lot more like a Zamboni machine, but possibly there are hordes of Zamboni machines living in Alaska that I've never heard of before. So one alternative that does fascinate me in particular that might be use of metal oxide nanoparticles instead of steel fibers, but one critical takeaway on this is whichever system it is, I don't know that we're going to have self-repairing roads in the next decade or so, probably not, but this is going to be the decade where we start seeing all the test pilot programs competing with each other to find out which one is best. And I think come next decade, we'll start seeing those developed and deployed. So there is a lot of room and a lot of savings that come from that, both in safety and in cost. We need energy to transport things, but the only things we transport are not people and cargo. We transport energy, we transport information, we transport waste, a very important aspect of these things. So we are looking to solar power as a big option. I'm also a big fan of nuclear, but solar has its earlier roots. It's the first power source for so many things. Everything is powered off the sun here. First hand, second hand, 10th hand, it's in there. And so we have this idea, let's build some big solar farms, and those sound like a great plan. But we probably don't want to avoid the idea that we can use this for smaller scale applications. Who here used to own one of those pocket calculators with the solar panel on it? Yeah, tons of them. The technology didn't really seem to ever stick around too much, did it? We got all these little, you can't really run one of these on a solar power panel as much as you would like to. It's not quite there yet. Maybe at one point in time, maybe with better batteries, but we use them a little bit too much, and where do we keep them? In our pocket, right? A lot of things are very low energy draw, though. What was cool about those calculators, you could use them in a room, just like this. It didn't have to be a sunny day outside. You didn't have to be outside in it. We have a lot of materials which are low energy draw materials, right? Or low frequency use with a good battery on them, that could potentially let us skip the idea of needing to plug them in, a fire alarm, a CO2 detector, etc. Just might have an improved little solar panel on like that charges itself up in the room. No need for wireless energy, transmission, which is trickier than we thought it was going to be with induction. No need for a million plugged-in things. No need to take it off the wall and unplug it or replug it. So that application is kind of micro solar might be a big deal for transport because, of course, one of the best ways to manage your transport is to minimize transport, right? You don't have to do all these extra steps. I love coffee. All right. So one little side note on that, taking things a little bit more futuristic on this is, imagine that every light plug nowadays, or every wall socket, you start seeing USB plugs on these now, right? A lot of new wall sockets have a little USB socket on them or a sword protector. Imagine that got replaced with a little diode that could track objects that had a little, coated a little pinprick on them that says, this is the object's panel, a little dot on each side perhaps. Kind of like we see in the VR lab where it tracks those glasses over at NASA. Now, it sends a little infrared as opposed to visible light beam over that thing at a relatively high intensity. Nothing too dangerous, but a lot more concentrated light here, and just powers it up. And it's a little mild wireless signal going back and forth, and a little beam of invisible power energy being sent to it, directed energy, as opposed to beamed across the room. That's another way you might actually be able to get things like phones or stuff like that actually need higher power draws to be able to run without actually needing a plug. So, and of course, as I was saying, we don't just move energy and information and cargo, we move garbage. And one of the things we so often go over on my show when we talk about advanced civilizations is that things like heat and waste are as important to actually keep your civilization running in terms of getting rid of them as the energy that you're using to run it on the front end. So, energy, information, fuel, and waste. Here's the thing to keep in mind. How do we optimize garbage waste disposal? Well, it's not about trying to optimize how good a garbage truck can get in there once a week to pick up a can real quick and take it off to someplace to get filtered. That's the back end. The ideal garbage disposal is where you don't actually have to run around your house grabbing all your individual trash bags, recycling bags, and composting bags out, separating them out, and then lysoling out the cans, trying to make them smell better, and putting them away and taking much time doing that. Unsurprisingly, I wrote this slide on garbage night at our house, but this idea that waste removal should be almost invisible, right? It falls into our general notion with artificial intelligence that the best machines are the invisible ones. The ones that they're not hidden, they just do their job so seamlessly, you never even notice them. So your Roomba, when it's running around making all that noise, we want to get away from that to some degree too. We want seamless, smooth garbage removal to the right locations. That's not going to be a single-use thing. It's going to be more ecology, which we'll get to. But speaking of vacuum cleaners, who here has seen the Jetsons? This robot butler, robot maid, very classic concept there from sci-fi. And what we said again is not a human intelligent machine there, but something really dumb and simple. Right? So often, all it takes to do the job, something really dumb and simple. Thankfully, nature can supply a lot of that for us too. So if you're interested in more on that topic, by the way, see our episode, The Future of Garbage. How big and small does a robot vacuum cleaner actually have to be? Sci-fi is full of tiny little nanomachines that self-replicate, inspired by amoeba and little microorganisms. How can we draw on nature for not only how to make these devices, but also how to power them, how to reproduce them, how to communicate to them, because that's a pretty tricky problem. And of course, how to kill them when we're done with them, when they've mutated or they've gotten their job done. That's important too. And biology hitches, there's a lot of ways to do that inside, of course, this complex ecosystem that is the individual human. The reality is that nature doesn't do single-species microorganism self-replicators either. That's something we see in sci-fi, the tiny little box or Borg cube or replicator. They all look the same. They're all the same size. They all do the same thing. That's not what nature teaches us a good approach, right? The amoeba eventually diverges into a whole bunch of different organisms, some of which eat the other amoeba, some of which become detritivores, follow up and eating the waste of the other amoeba, and so on. You get that ecosystem. And as we start looking at things like medical nanotechnology, we need to keep in mind that that is something that we're going to see too as that develops. If you end up with a host of nanobots inside you, trillions of them, assume there'll be millions of different species of varying sizes. Some might get to the visible organ size, some little chip inside you, the controller. Others might be smaller than cells, because one cool thing about nanotechnology is that while we can potentially repurpose existing organisms, either modifying them or just hijacking them, learning more about their signaling process so we can get them to do what we want, but we have things like carbon nanotubes or diamond batteries that can potentially let us do things that cells do, but a lot tinier. Graphene, those other super strong materials, they give us the option to make something that's very, very small. Most people, they don't really know how big a cell is. You say, well, you have biological cells. How big is one of those? How many atoms? They say, oh, probably a lot, dozens. Say, no, it's more like trillions. There's trillions of them. So you could potentially have a lot of room to make a device smaller than that using some of these new hypomaterials. All right, that takes us to number 8. They're actually all not 10. So, self-repairing homes and structures. It's nice to fix roads. It's nice to be able to clean your homes, but a big part of that, of course, is the maintenance cycle. We have places we can draw on some information here. What's the part that makes it so hard to repair houses? Crack in the foundation, crack in the walls, paint dries and chips. We have things we can mimic in nature for that. Bone osteoclasts and osteoplasts for repairing them, not necessarily adapting those themselves, but using their techniques. Paint refreshing, same as with skin cells. Maybe your paint grows itself off and, of course, flakes, and some little tailored organism comes by and eats those dead paint cells. Self-repairing structures are not just about having a nice home, too. They are what lets us avoid a lot of the traffic congestion on top of self-repairing roads. You can have more of them. And say, well, do we want more roads? Well, what's the big cost on having bike trails or having pedways between skyscrapers? There's a very heavy capital investment there in terms of, putting it up there and then maintaining it. That a self-repairing structure gets around a lot, especially if it's not just a self-repairing structure, but is also a self-inspecting one, right? So the key to good maintenance is running your PMCS checks, we always say in the Army. You have to get out there and do your preventative maintenance and care. If we actually have hardware and software that can learn how to inspect itself, that becomes a really big advantage. If it can send a little note that says, hey, I need my oil to be changed, change that. We're seeing things like that, right? If your phone could tell you, hey, I need this update patch. These are early stages. At what point does your house start saying, hey, the windows they're taking UV damage, you need to get those replaced? A little photo sensor might be all it took to need to know that. All those little tiny, tiny innovations that sometimes add up to be way more important than some of the big individual technologies. And one of those is the ability to look around at the structural piece of technology and say, how do I actually tell if I'm damaged? And of course, that could lead to our 9B, because I have to keep to actually 10 on the official list, introspective technologies. At what point in time, if we're talking about smart houses, do we start getting to the idea that it can not only diagnose itself, but is able to call on the archive to get advice from other ones? At what point in time do we begin getting to technologies that interface with each other to see what the most recent problems are? At what point in time do we start actually having artificial intelligence inside your house? And how much do you want with that, too? You say, well, it might be fun to have a house I could chat with, but that's also kind of creepy, especially really creepy. So, everything's the eye of the beholder. Some people might like a friendly house. Others will be happy knowing that smart house might mean it's still dumber than a squirrel. Again, we keep finding that so often these complicated tasks that we think require so much effort, like the robot maid or butler pushing the vacuum cleaner, didn't, right? They turned out to be really simple. Often our inspirations from that have been in nature, where you find out something's got maybe 6 neurons for one job you thought was going to be hard. But it could go the smart way, in which case, anybody here know of the Isaac Asimov classic robot novels, like The Three Laws? And in one of those characters, they have a character called Susan Calvin. She's a robo-psychologist. So she used to talk to robots when they misbehave, having problems. So, and that's a very classic humanoid AI thing that we saw in the kind of golden age of science fiction. But that sort of thing might actually have a version in the upcoming future. So, and of course, I really love the idea of potentially having networked hive minds able to talk to each other. So this takes us to our 10th topic, and here we're going to get a little bit more sci-fi. So when I was a teenager, I read a book series called The Galactic Center Saga by Gregory Benford, and there's just kind of one quick throwaway scene in there where in this they have basically robots have hunted down and killed humanity in various places, and they come across one place where humanity is gone, and there's these fields of corn still growing themselves, and the ants in them, they go out there and they harvest the corn and everything else, and they are programmed to take just the right size kernels, the ones they want, that the humans want, and they carry those to silos. And everything else they carry back to their hive. And say, Well, we always talk about, we worry about replacing nature with technology, and that's a real concern because, but hijacking nature to do your work might be a really good option, especially if you're looking to preserve that. So if you need to preserve a forest anyway, it doesn't matter if it's quite as efficient as some of the alternatives, right? If you're looking to maintain all of your culture, your ants and so forth, that's a good thing to do, is to purpose them towards that. There was a park, I think, in France where they were training crows or ravens to pick up garbage. And I don't know how successful that was, but it inspired me to one of the more comical anecdotes on the show, which was programming squirrels to run around parks, picking up cigarette butts and turning them into a machine, and they get extra nuts out of that. And so that's a good way to increase your biodensity too, because you can grow those little pellets somewhere, and that helps them feed up and store. And of course, it raises that secondary alternative problem from these things, because it's always cause and effect, and that means they're raiding your purse or your wallet while you're not looking, or your picnic basket, for random bits of stuff that isn't garbage to turn in as garbage. So stealing your chewing gum to go throw it in and get the little deposit pellet from the machine. But hijacked ecologies and organisms to help us out with what we want to do, and eventually to potentially help nature out with what it wants to get done too, so that we get this, again, human ecosystem, this ecosystem of technologies, and that's kind of where we're aiming in the long term. And then there's the one other follow-up for that is that's the technology that lets us go to other planets and either build artificial habitats in space to our needs, or to tailor future environments like Mars to find that balance based on its unique characteristics to actually create an ecology there, to create ecology, not just a native one that's going to be by itself there, but it has us in there from day one, a tailored ecology that's sturdy and reliable and featured to that world. And there are around 1 trillion planets we can probably colonize in this galaxy alone, so to help us be kind of skilled at that. So that's going to take us to the end of our presentation. And again, I want to thank everybody for coming out today, and we'll get to questions in just a moment. But if you do not get a chance to talk to me during the questions phase, I will be around for the rest of today. And you can always email me up there at isaacarthur.youtube@gmail.com. And of course, as we say, there are new episodes come out every Thursday, and we also have one monthly Sci-Fi Sunday episode where we just go ahead and relax and do sci-fi topics instead. So we've been doing that now for 8 years, and the 400 some episodes. I hope you'll find a few that you enjoy. And thank you for your time.
Great, thanks. So we will take questions now. So do we have questions from the audience?
Thank you, Isaac. I really enjoyed the talk. I would say that we, those of us that hijack organisms, we prefer the term bioutilization.
Bioutilization, I think. I shall remember that.
But hijacking works too. I noticed you didn't get to space much in this talk, and that's kind of where you a lot of your episodes end up. You did mention Mars in the last one, but when you were talking about solar power, I wonder if, in addition to getting better solar panels, we have better solar environments, say space, and then what are the possibilities for transmitting any space harvested solar energy back to Earth?
Really good. They're actually amazing. We have an episode on that, power satellites, that I think I actually moved out of the normal slideshow in favor of the biotech episodes here. This is something that's being looked at by the National Space Society for years, an option, and it's a good one as soon as we can actually do a little bit of our production off the ground. As you mentioned in your talk, it's so much easier to grab those resources. They are mixing so much cheaper. And in this case, probably the key one will be aluminum or silicon. They're not that hard to manipulate if you're in a power-rich environment, which the moon is. And at that point, you start making gigantic mirrors. And you can bring everything else up there as collectors, etc. We actually look at solar thermal in space a lot too, not just what you tend to think of as being regular PV panels. And then when it comes to beaming it down, that's actually the easy part. There's no weather in space, like there is, but not put into day and night. And you really don't have that much darkness. Depending on how far your satellites are away, you have a lot shorter night periods for those satellites. You can always have the satellites lock you onto any part of the hemisphere they can see to send their power over to too, so you can switch them pretty quickly. You beam it down by microwaves, which worries me a little bit because the first time I heard about that, I thought, oh, microwaves, so you mean it's a death ray? And I was like, yeah, okay. But the weird thing about microwaves is that for the most part, they go right through you. We've gotten fairly used to them in the microwave background. We got OSHA standards for how deep we can put it down. And the cool thing is it means we can actually take a field, right, a big field full of any crop we want and put a net over it of basically, think chicken wire, but more spacing. And that's the thing that absorbs those microwaves when they come down. It can do them at 85% efficiency, or the rectenna, as that's called. And that could be pretty localized, too, to avoid transmission. That could be something as small as someone's roof, potentially. It could be out in their garden. Well, it could be a big facility that the satellite aims at. And at that point in time, you have very low transmission, very low excess heat produced. I tend to think that even if we get nuclear fusion going, that's the way we go, because a nuclear fusion reactor is still going to produce a lot of heat on the ground that's not power. It's not going to get to 85% efficiency of conversion. So I think space-based solar is definitely looking at as a powerful option when we can do most of our manufacturing up in space.
I just wanted to follow up with the microwave radiation being beamed down to Earth. Does that change anything to like our energy levels, our heat levels? Like what do we change by bringing more energy down to the surface?
Any power that you drop down this planet is going to turn into heat before it leaves, unless it reflects away. Some of that will reflect away, unfortunately. We don't want it to. We want to get all of it we can. And basically, when it hits the ground, 85% becomes electricity that turns to heat after people use it, and 50% turns straight into heat. As opposed to with a solar panel, you're only getting light that was already on Earth. So that does have that issue of you're adding energy to it. You really get this, I was saying earlier, with waste and heat removal, really important things to advance civilizations. But it's still, because there's no carbon monoxide, dioxide footprint sucking stuff in and keeping it there, it's just added heat by itself. There's no catalyst effect that we know of yet. So, and who knows what that might actually turn out to be, because there will be something. Obviously, nothing's ever going to be quite so nice as it seems, but in of itself, it looks like we'll just add the heat of that actual energy itself, which would make it better than pretty much everything else we got going on right now, other than arguably solar, and even that's kind of arguable. So, ground-based solar, excuse me. I should add one little caveat on it. The advantage you have is if you know that you have a lot of energy coming into the planet from above in space. Another thing you put up there that's not a solar collector, but a solar shade. Exact same thing. You just put a few of those up, and they're actually a lot cheaper because it's just tin foil. And that's the easiest thing in the world to make out of an asteroid or from the moon. So you have to replace them, but it's just tin foil.
Yeah, hi. So Samuel online would like to know, how can heating be an advantage to steel?
Well, the heating of the steel itself isn't what the advantage is. It's that this heated steel, because you can heat that through induction, is permeating throughout the entire material, so it's evenly heating the asphalt. I don't want to get too much in the weeds on that one, because I only read the basic summary paper on that from a couple years back. But once this stuff is evenly heated across the surface, it becomes a lot more malleable to push on. You're not going to get any kind of, again, if you heat something unevenly, it's going to crack or bulge too. So the purpose there is that you can send that energy across the entire material evenly by inducting energy right into the steel itself via magnetism. So,
yeah, excellent imagination. I see the climate is missing from your picture. So what the ramification of climate change in this new transportation system? Or
how do we? I don't ever really view the climate as a problem that you fix any more than crime is. It's one of those you're constantly looking at. And so just with the other end of that, we said you're going to get extra heat if you start beaming power down. It's a much lesser problem, but it's still a problem. You have heat coming down that wouldn't normally hit this planet. You have some options for that. We came in one case with gigantic space towers you could radiate heat off above the atmosphere on that we were calling fractal obelisk towers. So, that's one way you might move heat directly from the planet to space without having to put it through the atmosphere. But there's going to be a million other problems, and we had to find 10 million more solutions to them as to how some of these things would help with technology. As Chris was saying, every bit that you use to transport materials into a building, everything you have to use to actually make those materials, that's your carbon footprint. So if you don't have to rip the drywall of your house because it's self-repairing, that obviously would help with that footprint a lot. Same for space-based power. If you are not burning stuff on the ground, or if you're not even making the panels on the ground here, but doing it off on the moon, which has no climate of note, then you don't have that footprint. So it's kind of that attack of 1,000 cuts. You try to deal with the issue. If you get a big solution, that's great. Something like solar shades actually might be, right? If you can just set those potentially to block only invisible infrared light from the sun, which is about half of it, and they'll never mess up our vision of the world because we don't see it. And you say you block 2% of the infrared. off the top of my head, I don't know how much temperature effect that would have, but it'd be pretty significant, I think, right? Those are some of the big solutions, but you have those big solution options, and then you also have the 1,000 little innovations that get it at one step or another that many of you have contributed to.
Thank you. Unfortunately, I've been looking at space solar power for most of my career, and oh my.
Yes.
I mean, we're
There's
talking
challenges.
about satellites that weigh between 60,000 and 180,000 metric tons in space. So you're building colonies on the moon that can use mass drivers to launch 3 kilograms at a time.
As many as you can. So,
Right. Not saying it's impossible, but I have some colleagues at NASA Ames where they ran a lot of those studies back in the 70s. And they said, yeah, the Ames people, they look at mass. They don't look at anything else. And, 60,000 metric tons is quite a bit for 10 gigawatts of power. So, maybe one of your future shows might look at the interstellar starshot ideas where they have giant space-based lasers to accelerate small interstellar spacecraft.
they have that episode.
They only require a few 100 gigawatts.
Yep.
So,
I had the chance to talk to Pete Warden at the last conference I spoke at out in Santa Monica a couple months ago. Pete Warden's the gentleman who runs that initiative, and he exchanged some notes on it after I decided to write an episode called Interstellar Probes that comes out in a couple weeks. But we looked at floors of laser propulsion. It's a great option, but it is power hungry. Same space-based solar. It's energy hungry if you're trying to launch from the Earth. So you try to source as much mass, all your raw stuff like shiny panels from the moon where it just takes a lot less, or could be no atmosphere to push through. It's ambitious. So I like to use this as an example of what could really kickstart space industry, because that might be another thing where there's 1,000 little things that add up, or it might be a couple big ones. Some people say asteroid mining, big gold and platinum things. Well, it's an option. To me, space-based solar, if you can make it work, becomes that one, because it's a multi-trillion-dollar economy, and the knock-on effect for that has to be huge. When? I don't know. If? I still can't say that too. But yeah, the mass issue is a real problem for everything in space.
and if you had that mass, it'd be a lot more fun to build fast human missions to go to Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune.
So what you do with your excess power on those, though, is you beam it at the back of those things when it's during the non-peak hours of usage.
Anyway,
And
just some food for thought. Thank you.
thank you.
We will wrap it up there. Thank you so much, Isaac, for your great presentation.